What happens when an army loses every road it needs to move? What happens when the fuel, the bridges, and the tunnels it depends on simply stop working? That is the question hanging over southern Iran right now, because in the middle of July 2026, a fragile ceasefire between the United States and Iran didn't just crack, it shattered. Quick favor before we go further. If stories like this deserve more attention than the algorithm gives them, hit like, hit subscribe, and drop one word in the comments. That's genuinely how a video like this reaches more people. Let's set the scene. Just weeks earlier, things looked calm. A preliminary deal between Washington and Tehran had brought tankers back into the Strait of Hormuz. Oil prices, which had spiked hard earlier in the year, were finally settling down. Shipping companies were quietly restoring routes they had suspended for months. The world exhaled. But calm in this region rarely lasts. According to reporting from U.S. officials, Vice President J.D. Vance had hinted that the pause was being used for something else entirely, refilling oil reserves that had been drained during the earlier fighting. In other words, one side may have seen the ceasefire as peace. The other may have seen it as a breather before round two. Neither side ever fully trusted the truce, and in hindsight, that mutual suspicion may have made the whole thing fragile from the very start. Then, in mid-July, Iran's Revolutionary Guard reportedly opened fire on commercial vessels crossing the Strait of Hormuz, a direct violation of the one condition the ceasefire was actually built on: safe passage through that waterway. The timing made it worse. The strike happened just hours before President Trump was due to leave for a NATO summit. His reply was short. As far as he was concerned, the deal was over. What followed was not one strike. It was a chain reaction. The U.S. launched a wave of attacks. Iran responded by declaring the strait closed to foreign shipping and hitting more. Tankers. Oil jumped nearly 9% in a single day. And from there, each move triggered the next, escalating faster than almost anyone expected. By the night of July 17th into the 18th, the United States carried out what analysts are calling one of its largest strike waves since the fighting first flared up back in February. But this time, something about the targeting looked different. The U.S. wasn't just going after weapons anymore. It was going after everything that carries them. Bridges, railways, tunnels, ports. The physical connective tissue holding Iran's entire southern coast together. At the center of it all sits one city, Bandar Abbas. If you don't know the name, here's why it matters. It is the headquarters of Iran's navy. It is the country's busiest commercial port. And it sits right at the narrow mouth of the Strait of Hormuz, the passage that roughly a fifth of the world's oil moves through every single day. According to U.S. Central Command, strikes in this wave hit coastal defense systems, missile and drone storage sites, and maritime facilities across Bushehr, Chabahar, Jask, Konarak, Abu Musa, and Bandar Abbas itself. Iranian state media reported that entry tunnels into the city were damaged, and that at least 5 or 6 major road and rail bridges nearby were hit, with some reportedly destroyed outright. Photos verified by international outlets showed one bridge near Bandar Abbas snapped clean in the middle, while another connecting the city to nearby. Rowden was left visibly cratered along its span. Local reports suggested drivers were being forced onto dry riverbeds just to get in or out of the city, an almost surreal image for a modern port city that, until days earlier, was moving a fifth of the world's oil traffic through its waters. Now here's the question worth sitting with for a second. Why bridges? Why tunnels? Why not just the missiles themselves? Because a missile sitting in a warehouse is not a threat. A missile that cannot reach a launch site, cannot get fuel, cannot connect to a working radar, might as well not exist. Hitting a bridge is quieter than hitting a warhead, but it can be far more damaging because a collapsed bridge doesn't just remove one weapon, it paralyzes an entire supply route until a new one is built, which can take months, sometimes years. Think of it like cutting the roads to a hospital instead of attacking the hospital itself. The building still stands, but nothing inside it can function without the supplies coming in from outside. And this is exactly why those underground tunnels matter so much. These are not simple road passages. For decades, Iran has built one of the most extensive underground military networks in the world, tunneling deep into its mountains to shelter missiles, fast attack boats, drones, and command posts from exactly this kind of airstrike. Earlier in the conflict, the U.S. had tried striking those buried facilities directly, hard, costly, and uncertain work, since a mountain full of reinforced concrete doesn't collapse easily no matter how precise the weapon is. Hitting the mouths of the tunnels instead is a smarter, cheaper trade. It accomplishes two things at once. It cuts the route south, and it exposes whatever is sheltering inside, because none of it can move without going through that entrance. Think of it this way. You don't need to blow up an entire mountain if you can simply seal the only door leading out of it. According to reports from Iranian state media, the entry points of at least 2 major highway tunnels serving Bandar Abbas were severely damaged in this wave, effectively turning what used to be a protected shortcut into a dead end. Whatever equipment was stored deeper inside those tunnels is now sitting in place, safe from direct destruction perhaps, but functionally useless until engineers can clear a path back out. Bandar Abbas is also reportedly the home base for the small, fast attack boats Iran's navy has used to threaten and board commercial ships in the strait. So striking the port isn't just about the port. It's about disabling the very hand that has been enforcing Iran's blockade threats. The same logic applies along the coast road connecting Bandar Abbas to Shiraz and onward to Tehran, a corridor U.S. Central Command has referred to as military logistics infrastructure. According to reporting, this route was one of the main paths Iran's Revolutionary Guard used to move ammunition and missile launchers toward the south. Strike by strike, that corridor was reportedly dismantled. Rail junctions, an airport farther east, telecom towers. Bandar Abbas itself reportedly lost power and went dark. Let's name what this looks like because it matters. This isn't a single act of retaliation. It looks more like a system being methodically taken apart, piece by piece. Its ships and attack boats at sea, its radar and air defense in the sky, its ammunition and drone depots on the ground. And underneath all of it, its fuel, its power grid, its logistics network, the blood supply that keeps any modern military moving. Because the Revolutionary Guard isn't only a military branch, it functions almost like a state inside the state, controlling ports, a share of Iran's oil exports, and extensive smuggling networks alongside its formal armed forces. Cutting a normal army's ammunition weakens it. Cutting an organization's ammunition, income, and internal networks all at once is something closer to stripping it down to bare bones. Analysts following the campaign argue that this appears to be exactly the point. Not a single decisive battlefield win, but the slow unraveling of the connective tissue that holds the whole organization together, one severed link at a time. It's a slower, less dramatic strategy than a single knockout strike, but arguably a far harder one to recover from. And the most surprising target in this entire wave wasn't anywhere near the coast. It was up in the north, near the border with Turkmenistan. According to reports, U.S. cruise missiles struck a railway bridge in Golestan province on a line most people outside the region have probably never heard of. But this bridge sits directly on a rail corridor connecting China to Iran, part of Beijing's broader Belt and Road network, running through Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan before reaching Tehran. Here's why that single bridge matters more than its size suggests. China reportedly built this rail corridor specifically so it could keep buying Iranian oil without routing tankers through waters the U.S. Navy can watch closely, namely the Strait of Hormuz and the Strait of Malacca. It was a land route built to survive exactly this kind of naval pressure. Taking that bridge out isn't just a tactical strike. According to analysts, it strikes directly at Iran's ability to keep its economy connected to one of its most important partners, even while under sanctions. After hitting both ends of the map, the south at Bandar Abbas and the north at that rail bridge, the wave of strikes reportedly moved along the coast itself. Keshem, Kish, Bushehr, Sirik, Jask. Coastal towns and islands were struck one after another, including Greater Tunb Island, sitting almost directly in the middle of the strait. To understand the logic here, it helps to know how Iran's naval strength actually works today. The large warships, the easy, visible targets, were reportedly destroyed earlier in the conflict. What's left, and what's genuinely harder to eliminate, are the small, fast attack boats, vessels that can be broken down, hidden, and reassembled quickly. Even so, U.S. Central Command claimed strikes in this wave hit dozens of them. Across the whole coastal campaign, the U.S. reported hitting close to 90 military targets in a single wave, including short-range air defense systems, missile depots, and more than 60 attack boats. When a power station on Kish Island was struck, the island reportedly went dark almost immediately. In Chabahar, a coastal surveillance tower Iran had used to track and coordinate attacks on commercial ships, was reportedly leveled entirely, a direct hit against Iran's ability to threaten shipping in the strait going forward. None of this stayed confined to the coastline either. Strikes reportedly reached inland too, toward Avaz in the southwest, and an airport to sites hosting U.S. forces in Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and Jordan, including a naval facility in Bahrain. Even Qatar, which had been quietly working as a mediator, reportedly took hits. The scale of this retaliation is not small either. Toward Kuwait alone, reports suggest hundreds of ballistic missiles and well over 1,000 drones have been launched since the conflict reignited. Most were reportedly intercepted. Some got through. The most symbolic hit landed in Kuwait, where Iran reportedly damaged a power and desalination plant, a facility that supplies the vast majority of the country's drinking water. In a desert nation, that is not a minor infrastructure hit, it is closer to an existential threat. Iran's message, according to officials, was blunt: keep striking our infrastructure and Gulf infrastructure gets hit harder in return. The ripple effects have reportedly spread even further, with pro-Iranian forces in northern Iraq allegedly striking a weapons depot linked to Kurdish opposition groups, prompting a security alert from the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. Iran, in short, appears to be trying to spread the cost of this war across the entire region, rather than absorbing it alone. The calculation seems fairly simple. The more Iran can make its own losses felt by American allies and the bases hosting U.S. forces, the more expensive and politically uncomfortable this war becomes for Washington to keep fighting. Now here's a quick pause, because what comes next might be the most important part of this whole story, the invisible limit that even Washington can't fully ignore. Because for all the dominance the U.S. appears to be showing on the ground, there is one factor quietly working against it too: oil. As the naval blockade tightens around Iranian ports, President Trump reportedly floated the idea of a 20% toll on ships passing through the strait. Ship traffic has dropped. Tankers are avoiding the Gulf, and a route that used to carry roughly a fifth of the world's crude oil is under real strain. In Washington, Congress reportedly moved a $95 billion. When a power station on Kish Island was struck, the island reportedly went dark almost immediately. In Chabahar, a coastal surveillance tower Iran had used to track and coordinate attacks on commercial ships was reportedly leveled entirely, a direct hit against Iran's ability to threaten shipping in the strait going forward. None of this stayed confined to the coastline either. Strikes reportedly reached inland too, toward Ahvaz in the southwest, and an airport in Sistan and Baluchistan in the southeast. The message being sent, intentionally or not, is hard to miss. No region of Iran is considered off-limits. So how has Iran responded to all of this? By hitting where it still can. According to senior Revolutionary Guard officials, the doctrine is straightforward: all Iranian territory is one connected whole, and any nation hosting a U.S. military base becomes a legitimate target by extension. That reasoning is why Iran's retaliation shifted across the strait toward the wider Gulf. Iran reportedly launched missile and drone waves against sites hosting U.S. forces in Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and Jordan, including a naval facility in Bahrain. Even Qatar, which had been quietly working as a mediator, reportedly took hits. The scale of this retaliation is not small either. Toward Kuwait alone, reports suggest hundreds of ballistic missiles and well over 1,000 drones have been launched since the conflict reignited. Most were reportedly intercepted. Some got through. The most symbolic hit landed in Kuwait, where Iran reportedly damaged a power and desalination plant, a facility that supplies the vast majority of the country's drinking water. In a desert nation, that is not a minor infrastructure hit, it is closer to an existential threat. Iran's message, according to officials, was blunt: keep striking our infrastructure, and Gulf infrastructure gets hit harder in return. The ripple effects have reportedly spread even further, with pro-Iranian forces in northern Iraq allegedly striking a weapons depot linked to Kurdish opposition groups, prompting a security alert from the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. Iran, in short, appears to be trying to spread the cost of this war across the entire region rather than absorbing it alone. The calculation seems fairly simple. The more Iran can make its own losses felt by American allies and the bases hosting U.S. forces, the more expensive and politically uncomfortable this war becomes for Washington to keep fighting. Now here's a quick pause, because what comes next might be the most important part of this whole story, the invisible limit that even Washington can't fully ignore. Because for all the dominance the U.S. appears to be showing on the ground, there is one factor quietly working against it too: oil. As the naval blockade tightens around Iranian ports, President Trump reportedly floated the idea of a 20% toll on ships passing through the strait. Ship traffic has dropped. Tankers are avoiding the Gulf, and a route that used to carry roughly a fifth of the world's crude oil is under real strain. In Washington, Congress reportedly moved a $95 billion war funding package forward, while the U.S. Treasury targeted the shadow shipping and finance networks Iran allegedly uses to sell oil around sanctions. But here's the real puzzle: why haven't oil prices spiked as high as everyone predicted? When the strait first closed earlier this year, Goldman Sachs reportedly called it the largest oil supply shock in modern history, with potential losses estimated at 11 million barrels a day. Some analysts predicted prices could rocket toward $200 or $300 a barrel. Instead, prices have stayed in a much calmer $90 to $120 range. The answer, according to JP Morgan, is stockpiles. Just before this crisis escalated, global oil inventories reportedly sat around 8.5 billion barrels, well above historical norms, and countries have been drawing them down at a record pace ever since. Even China, the world's largest oil importer, reportedly cut its imports by roughly 4 million barrels a day, partly by shifting toward electric vehicles, and partly by tapping years of reserves it had quietly built up. In short, the world avoided the worst immediate shock because almost everyone had been saving for a moment exactly like this one. But that cushion has a limit, and that limit is Washington's real dilemma. Trump reportedly defended his earlier decision to wind the war down at the G7 by pointing out that American reserves would run dry within about 4 weeks if the conflict kept going. Today, those reserves are said to be even thinner. According to U.S. Energy Information Administration data, the U.S. Strategic Petroleum Reserve has fallen from roughly 415 million barrels before the war to around 325 million, the lowest level since 1983. And there's a hard technical floor here too. This oil sits in enormous underground salt caverns, and you cannot simply pump them dry. Doing so risks the caverns collapsing. Analysts suggest at least 160 million barrels need to stay in place just to maintain pressure and structural safety. J.P. Morgan reportedly estimates that things get genuinely dangerous once global inventories fall below 6.8 billion barrels. And Iran, analysts warn, could still make this worse. Beyond Hormuz, there's the Bab al-Mandeb Strait, connecting the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden. Since Saudi Arabia began routing more of its exports westward, oil flow through that passage has reportedly grown from around 3 million barrels a day to 8 million. If Iran chose to squeeze that route too, whether through allied forces or direct strikes, the global shortfall could reportedly climb toward 20 million barrels a day. That's the invisible ceiling sitting over this entire war. The fighting on the ground looks unrestrained. But somewhere above it, the real limit isn't missiles. It's the number of barrels sitting in tanks around the world. Despite that economic pressure, military preparation on the ground suggests something bigger may still be coming. According to reports, the U.S. has moved 12 F-16 CJ aircraft, specialized radar hunting jets nicknamed Wild Weasels, to a base in Jordan, aircraft whose entire purpose is blinding an opponent's air defense systems before a larger strike. A significant air bridge has reportedly been set up, shifting additional fighter squadrons from Europe toward bases in the Middle East, alongside thousands more Marines trained for amphibious operations. There is reportedly discussion in Washington about expanding strikes further into Iran's strategic infrastructure, and even early planning around a limited ground operation involving regional partners, a stark shift from just days earlier, when ground troops were being firmly ruled out. Israel, for its part, has issued its own blunt warning that any further Iranian retaliation will be met with what it calls a crushing response. Massing radar hunting aircraft on a front usually signals one thing: a bigger air campaign is likely coming, and the plan starts with blinding the other side first. A country whose air defense has already been degraded becomes something closer to an open target list than a defended nation. Inside Iran, there are also reports of Arab communities in Avaz and Kurdish groups in several regions being quietly rearmed, raising the uncomfortable possibility that Iran could soon be facing outside pressure and internal fractures at exactly the same time, a combination few governments handle well. One more quick favor before we get to how this actually ends. If you've made it this far, you clearly care about this story more than most viewers will. Tapping subscribe now genuinely helps. A channel like this, keep making videos this detailed. History offers a strange kind of preview for what happens when a modern military gets cut off from fuel and logistics rather than defeated outright. Imperial Japan, in the early 1940s, built one of the most feared navies on Earth. Yet its entire war effort depended on oil it didn't produce at home. When that oil access was choked off, first through sanctions, then through blockade, Japan's military strength on paper barely changed. Its ships were still there, its planes were still there. But without fuel reaching the front, that strength became almost impossible to use. It's a reminder that wars aren't only won by who has the biggest force. They're often decided by who can still move that force when it matters. Iran's Revolutionary Guard faces a version of that same problem today, just compressed into weeks instead of years. Its equipment largely still exists. Its people are largely still there. What's being dismantled piece by piece is its ability to actually move any of it where it's needed. So where does this actually go from here? The honest answer is that both sides appear stuck, just in very different ways. The United States looks dominant on the map, but it's boxed in by that same oil ceiling. Its reserves are thinning. It cannot sustain a truly open-ended war, and it cannot fully close the strait without damaging the global economy it also depends on. Push too hard, and it risks a long, costly ground conflict. Pull back, and it risks handing Iran effective control over one of the world's most important shipping lanes. Its allies in the Gulf, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, Jordan, are all now sitting well within range of Iranian retaliation, which makes this far from a clean, contained fight. Every ally drawn deeper into this only raises the political cost of continuing and the diplomatic cost of stopping. That's why the framing of the Revolutionary Guard as simply doomed is too simple. Iran's position is genuinely difficult. Its southern logistics network has reportedly been cut apart, its rail link to China damaged, its finances squeezed hard by sanctions, and ethnic tensions inside the country appear to be rising. But it still holds real cards, hidden attack boats, sea mines, missiles that can reach deep into the Gulf. And a force pushed into a corner sometimes makes its most dangerous move exactly when it looks weakest. History is full of examples of retreating powers lashing out harder, not because they believed they could still win outright, but because giving up quietly was seen as more dangerous than fighting on. So maybe the real question isn't whether Iran wins this. It's whether it can keep standing while being stripped down piece by piece. It's worth pausing here on something important. Numbers like 90 military targets or over 1,000 drones come largely from U.S. Central Command statements and open source analysts piecing together satellite images and local reports. Iran disputes many of these figures. The U.S., in turn, has disputed some Iranian claims too, including accusations around how certain tankers were damaged. Coverage of this conflict varies sharply depending on the outlet, some framing it as reckless escalation, others as necessary and overdue pressure. Neither framing tells the whole story on its own, and both are worth reading with a healthy amount of skepticism. And underneath all of the strategic analysis, there are real people living through this in darkened cities in southern Iran and in Kuwait, where a water supply was directly hit. Casualty figures reported by Iranian officials cannot be independently verified. That uncertainty is worth remembering every time a number gets repeated as fact. What makes this moment especially unstable is that two very different paths seem to be running at the same time. On one track, escalation, radar hunting jets massing, an amphibious force gathering, open talk of a ground option, and Iranian threats to widen the war toward the Bab al-Mandeb, Iraq, and the broader Gulf. On the other track, something quieter, both sides appear to still be trying to salvage whatever is left of that earlier ceasefire. Iran is reportedly maintaining contact through Oman and Qatar. Trump himself has, at times, downplayed the fighting as a limited skirmish rather than a full war. So this conflict isn't fully over, and it isn't fully all out either. It's sitting in a genuinely dangerous middle ground, and that uncertainty might be the most important thing to understand about it right now. In the end, this entire story comes down to one question worth remembering. It isn't simply when this war ends. It's whether Iran's Revolutionary Guard can survive being slowly cut off from everything that keeps a modern military alive, or whether, in falling, it drags down a fuel-starved region, a strait on the edge of shutting completely, and a wider gulf along with it. Wars like this rarely end with a single dramatic surrender. More often, they end quietly, with one side simply unable to move, unable to resupply, unable to keep the lights on long before anyone officially calls it over. That quiet ending is usually far harder to spot than a battlefield defeat, and far harder to reverse once it truly sets in. Keep an eye on a few specific signals if you want to understand where this heads next, whether the roads into Bandar Abbas reopen, whether Iran's fast attack boats return to open water, whether oil prices stay calm or suddenly jump, because that single number tells you more about how traders read this war than almost any headline will, and where Iran's next retaliation actually lands, back at the strait, out toward the Bab al-Mandeb, or directly at a Gulf capital. Because history has shown again and again that a powerful military force rarely collapses at the moment it looks strongest. It usually breaks quietly when its supply lines, its fuel, and its logistics are cut out from under it, piece by piece, until there's simply nothing left to move. And those darkened streets around Bandar Abbas might be the very first sign of exactly that kind of silent collapse. So here's what I want to know from you. Do you think this pressure campaign genuinely breaks Iran's Revolutionary Guard? Or does Iran end up shutting the strait completely and reshaping the entire global oil market instead? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read through all of them. And if you want to keep following this story as it develops, subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is only going to move faster from here.